I never imagined a single joke could unravel an entire engagement before the wedding day even arrived. It happened at a company party, when my fiancée, Lily, laughed and told her boss she couldn't wait to become a real trophy wife after we got married. Everyone around us burst into laughter, but I felt something inside me freeze. At first, I tried to brush it off as harmless banter, yet the words kept replaying in my head long after the night ended. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became, as if that joke wasn't just a joke at all. And that growing doubt slowly pushed me toward a decision I never thought I'd have to make. In the weeks after that party, Lily began to change in ways I couldn't quite ignore anymore. She came home from work almost every day complaining about how draining her job was, how her manager didn't appreciate her, and how she wished she could just quit and finally enjoy life. At first, I offered comfort, thinking it was just a temporary phase, but the conversations kept shifting in a direction that worried me. She started talking about wanting to become a lifestyle blogger, or maybe teaching yoga, or maybe doing something creative and fun without the pressure of a traditional career. None of those ideas were truly planned out, yet she spoke about them as if quitting her job after marriage was simply the natural next step. She even pointed out how several of her friends had already left their jobs right after tying the knot, laughing about how their husbands take good care of them. Every time she said it, I felt a small crack forming somewhere in my trust. It didn't help that her tone was always half joking, half expecting, like she was testing how I would react. I tried to reason with myself that maybe she was just venting, but deep down, something in me knew I couldn't ignore the pattern. And then, one night, while sitting with my best friend Daniel, everything clicked in the worst possible way. Daniel had gone through a messy divorce not long ago, and he told me how his ex-wife had pulled the exact same move, quitting her job immediately after the wedding, then demanding full financial support when the marriage fell apart. He told me how he had been blindsided, how he wished someone had warned him earlier, and how a prenup could have saved him years of emotional and financial stress. Hearing that, a cold shiver ran through me, because the similarities were impossible to ignore. I went home that night feeling uneasy, replaying Lily's comments in my head, wondering if I was heading down the same path without even realizing it. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, while Lily was at work, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my laptop, debating whether to take the step that had been forming quietly in the back of my mind. After nearly an hour of hesitation, I finally booked a consultation with a family attorney. Walking into the law office a few days later, I felt strangely out of place, like someone preparing for a divorce before even getting married. But when I explained my concerns, the attorney didn't laugh. Instead, he nodded and told me I wasn't the first person to face this situation. We discussed different clauses, protections, and scenarios I had never considered before. The one that stood out most was a clause stating that if either partner voluntarily quit their job without mutual agreement, they would be financially responsible for the consequences. It sounded fair, logical, and necessary. By the end of the meeting, I agreed to move forward with drafting the prenup. But as I walked out of the office with those papers in my hand, I had no idea just how violently everything was about to explode. Lily wasn't supposed to see the prenup yet, but fate clearly had other plans. One afternoon, she came home early, and while I was still at work, she found the envelope on my desk. By the time I walked through the door, she was standing in the living room with the papers in her hand, her face pale, eyes burning with disbelief and anger. She didn't yell at first. She just asked one question, slowly trembling. "So you think I'm using you?" I tried to explain that it wasn't about distrust, that it was simply protection for both of us, that I had seen people get hurt because they weren't prepared. But she didn't hear any of it. Her voice rose with every sentence, accusing me of treating her like some gold digger, of humiliating her, of turning our relationship into a business transaction. She said that if I loved her, I would never ask her to sign something so insulting. Before I could respond, her mother called, clearly already informed. I could hear her voice through the speaker, sharp, emotional, dramatic, saying that women naturally sacrifice career opportunities for family, and that it was my responsibility to provide stability once Lily became a wife. She said prenups were for people who didn't believe in marriage, that I was setting us up for failure before we even began. Then Lily's father joined in, adding pressure in a quieter but firmer tone, saying he didn't like the idea of a prenup at all, and that it sent the wrong message to both families. It felt like I was suddenly on trial, surrounded by accusations from every direction. They insisted Lily deserved financial security if she chose to focus on being a wife and future mother. They kept repeating that it was tradition, that this was how marriages had always worked, that love was about trust, not contracts. I tried again to explain the simple math. My income wasn't enough to support 2 adults and a household if one person chose not to work. I told them I wasn't rich, that we would struggle, that it wasn't feasible for me to carry everything alone. But the more I explained, the more it sounded to them like excuses. Lily cried, saying she couldn't believe I saw her as a burden. Her mother accused me of being selfish and ungrateful for everything Lily had done for our relationship. Her father said he was disappointed in my lack of commitment. I stood there in the middle of the chaos, feeling like I was shouting into a void. Every logical point I made was twisted into an attack. Every attempt to calm things down only made the situation worse. By the end of the night, Lily locked herself in the bedroom and refused to speak to me. I sat alone on the couch, exhausted, wondering how something meant to protect us had turned into a full-blown family battle. And as the silence stretched on, I realized this was only the beginning. The next morning, Lily emerged from the bedroom looking calmer, but there was a tension in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She placed a new set of documents on the kitchen table and said she had drafted her own version of the prenup. This one, she explained, favored her almost entirely, with clauses that protected her income, her potential career choices, and even included generous compensation if she ever chose to stay home. I picked up the papers and skimmed through them, feeling a sinking weight in my chest. It was clear she had no intention of negotiating in good faith. This was a preemptive strike. I asked her about her plans, genuinely wanting to understand what she envisioned for herself. She gave vague answers, talking about exploring passions and seeing where life takes me, but there was no concrete career plan, no backup strategy, nothing that suggested she had thought about the practical realities of adult life. The more we talked, the more obvious it became that she hadn't considered finances seriously at all. She was focused on what she could gain rather than what she could contribute. I tried to explain the practical side of things: bills, rent, savings, emergencies, retirement. I asked her how she expected us to manage if she wasn't earning an income and relied entirely on me. She nodded, seeming to understand, but her eyes told a different story. There was still a spark of entitlement, a sense that she believed life would somehow work out in her favor without effort. I felt a mix of frustration and disappointment. We argued, calmly at first, then more heatedly, as I tried to impress upon her the seriousness of financial responsibility. I reminded her of friends who had left jobs after marriage and then struggled when reality hit. She listened, occasionally flinching but never fully acknowledging the point. At one moment, she paused and admitted she hadn't thought about these details, that maybe she had been naive. It was the first crack in her confident exterior, but it didn't feel like a true change. Her attention quickly shifted back to the contract, insisting on her terms and benefits. I realized that while she might grasp the numbers intellectually, she hadn't internalized the mindset needed for shared responsibility. Her approach was still largely self-serving, despite the polite words she used. I felt a growing urgency to address this before we went any further. I told her that marriage wasn't a game of strategy, but a partnership requiring honesty and shared sacrifice. She nodded again, but I could see that her understanding was only superficial. Over the next few hours, we dissected every clause, debated every possibility, and tried to reconcile our visions. By the end of the day, Lily admitted that she saw the financial reality more clearly, but I knew in my gut that her mindset hadn't shifted entirely. Her ambition and charm were still filtered through the lens of self-interest. It was an uncomfortable truth. I was standing face to face with the reality of who she really was, not the person I thought I was about to marry. I felt a mix of sadness, caution, and determination, knowing that the path ahead would be far more complicated than I had ever imagined. And as we parted that evening, the prenup still lay between us, a silent reminder of the growing divide and the work that remained before trust could ever be rebuilt. Over the next few weeks, Lily's behavior grew increasingly unpredictable. She became obsessed with extravagant wedding ideas, spending hours scrolling through luxury venues, designer dresses, and over-the-top decorations. She would talk about the perfect Instagram-worthy wedding, as if it were the ultimate goal in life, ignoring any practical discussions about our finances. At first, I tried to engage with her enthusiasm, thinking it was harmless excitement, but something about the intensity felt off. Then the first warning signs appeared. She missed important deadlines at work, arrived late to meetings, and even botched a crucial presentation that she had been preparing for weeks. Her colleagues noticed, and one of them eventually confided in me about a private group chat Lily was part of. The chat was called Trophy Wives in Training. I felt my stomach drop as I read the messages describing strategies for quitting work after marriage, leveraging partners for financial gain, and planning lavish lifestyles without earning a dime. It was not a joke, not a harmless fantasy. It was a blueprint, and Lily was actively participating. I confronted her gently at first, asking if this was serious or just idle chatter with friends. She laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but the hesitation in her voice betrayed her. Over the next few days, I noticed small, deliberate actions that aligned with what I had read. She forgot to prepare for meetings, exaggerated her stress, and even hinted that a sudden layoff might not be so bad if it came with unemployment benefits. It became clear that she was testing the waters, seeing if she could manipulate the system to her advantage. Every conversation with her now carried a hidden agenda. She would ask about bills and expenses with a tone that suggested she was calculating how much she could extract from me without contributing. She became charming in a manipulative way, turning complaints into sympathy and using humor to mask her intentions. I watched as the excitement about our wedding became a tool for her social image rather than a genuine expression of commitment. She would host planning sessions with friends, showcasing dresses and cakes, and then share private messages about how soon she could step away from her career. I felt trapped between disbelief and anger, unsure how to confront her without completely destroying what remained of our relationship. It was as if the person I thought I knew had been replaced by someone entirely different. The thought that she might truly be trying to exploit me financially weighed heavily on my mind. I started documenting her actions, keeping records of missed work, suspicious conversations, and the group chat messages I had obtained. It was not just mistrust anymore, it was evidence. By the end of the month, I could no longer ignore the reality. Lily's obsession with luxury, her deliberate missteps at work, and the calculated discussions with her friends made it undeniable that she had a plan, and I was the target. I realized that if I didn't act soon, the situation could spiral completely out of control. For the first time, I understood that the engagement was not just under threat, it was already in danger, and the person I had been preparing to marry might never have intended to build a life with me at all. Every smile, every laugh, every shared moment now felt shadowed by the knowledge of her intentions. The excitement of our wedding had become a mask for a scheme I could no longer ignore. And with that realization came a clarity I hadn't felt before. I needed to take decisive action, or I would be trapped in a situation I could never recover from. The tension between us reached its peak one evening when I finally decided to lay everything on the table. I told Lily in no uncertain terms that there were only two options: sign the original prenup as we had discussed, or we call off the wedding. Her face shifted from shock to disbelief in an instant. She refused to believe that I would actually consider ending our engagement over a piece of paper. Her voice trembled as she pleaded, insisting that I didn't trust her, that I was being unfair, that love shouldn't come with conditions. Her mother called immediately, demanding to speak with me and launching into an emotional tirade about tradition, sacrifice, and the sanctity of marriage. Her father joined in as well, trying to pressure me with reminders of family honor and loyalty. Lily herself alternated between tears and anger, telling me I was cruel, heartless, and selfish. She even suggested that we could modify the contract to include a wife salary fund, an absurd idea meant to appease her while still serving her interests. Her friends got involved too, sending messages to Lily urging her to fight for her rights, to stand her ground, and to make me bend. Every attempt I made to calmly explain the situation was met with resistance, accusations, or emotional manipulation. Lily would cry, then argue, then threaten, cycling through each tactic like a practiced routine. I began to realize that this was no longer about negotiating terms. It had become a battle of wills. She tried guilt, saying that if I really loved her, I would compromise. She tried charm, trying to make me believe that everything would work out if I just relented. She tried intimidation, hinting at public embarrassment and threats of legal action. Every day brought a new tactic, a new way to pressure me into giving up. Despite the onslaught, I remained firm, repeating that the original prenup was non-negotiable if we were to move forward. At times, the emotional weight felt crushing. The arguments lasted hours, sometimes until late at night, leaving both of us drained and frustrated. I began documenting every interaction, every email, every threat, knowing that a clear record might be necessary in the future. Even as Lily's protests escalated, a part of me recognized that signing any modified version would only reward manipulation. Finally, after what felt like endless days of pressure, Lily signed the original prenup. She did it reluctantly, her anger barely concealed, her eyes flashing with frustration and resentment. The room was heavy with silence once the pen left the paper. She didn't say thank you or offer any acknowledgement. She simply turned and left the table. I sat there, exhausted but resolute, knowing that I had stood my ground. There was relief, but it was mixed with sadness, a sense of loss for what I had hoped our relationship could be. I realized that even though the contract was signed, the underlying issues had not disappeared. Trust had been strained, intentions revealed, and the engagement had been fundamentally changed. By the end of that week, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same between us. The prenup was no longer just a legal document. It had become a symbol of the conflict, a marker of the cracks that had formed long before the ink dried. And deep down, I knew that the most difficult decisions were still ahead. A few days after Lily signed the prenup, she announced she was going on a week-long spa retreat to clear her mind. I was left alone in our apartment, trying to process the whirlwind of the past month. The silence felt heavier than I expected, filled with questions I couldn't shake. I began to realize that signing the contract had not fixed anything. It had only paused the confrontation. When Lily returned, she wasn't alone. She came with a friend and a man claiming to be a consulting attorney, though something about him seemed off. They arrived with a stack of documents, insisting that certain clauses of the prenup were unfair, outdated, or unenforceable. Lily spoke with a calm authority, the same charm she used to manipulate situations, but this time it was aimed squarely at me. She suggested changes, adjustments, and even proposed we renegotiate certain financial responsibilities. Her friend added support, offering anecdotes about couples who had successfully fought prenups in court. I listened quietly, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger. It became painfully clear that she had not changed her mindset. She was still seeking advantage, still trying to bend reality to her favor. I tried to reason with her, explaining that the prenup had been carefully drafted to protect both of us and that any changes would undo the entire point of it. I reminded her of the financial realities we faced and the trust that had been so severely tested. But Lily and her entourage persisted, using every tactic: charm, logic, appeals to emotion, and subtle threats. It felt like a negotiation I had no hope of winning, yet I knew I couldn't compromise my principles. After hours of back and forth, I reached a decision that had been forming in the back of my mind for weeks. I told Lily, clearly and firmly, that I no longer wanted to get married. The room went silent. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with anger, and finally filled with tears. Her mother and father were furious, shouting accusations and warnings, calling me unreasonable and heartless. Lily tried to argue, to plead, to convince me that I was making a mistake, but I remained resolute. I could no longer ignore the reality of her intentions, the manipulation, and the lack of true partnership. Her friends tried to interject, to sway me with their own stories, but it was too late. The decision was final. Lily packed her belongings and left the apartment, visibly frustrated and hurt, and never looked back. The engagement was officially over. In the days that followed, the fallout extended beyond just us. Her friends criticized me online, her family continued to vent their disappointment, and she attempted to contact me multiple times, hoping to change my mind. But I remained firm, understanding that going back would only repeat the same cycle of manipulation and distrust. I watched as she moved out of the city, leaving behind the life we had been planning together. The apartment, once filled with anticipation and dreams of marriage, now felt quiet, empty, and final. I realized that ending the engagement was not just a protective measure, but a necessary step to preserve my own well-being. The truth about Lily had been laid bare, and I could finally move forward without the constant tension and deception. It was painful, yes, but also a relief, a clearing of the storm clouds that had been looming over my life for too long. And in that clarity, I began to imagine a future where honesty, mutual respect, and genuine partnership would guide my path instead of manipulation and hidden agendas. In the weeks after the breakup, Lily's life took a sharp downturn. She was let go from her job and denied unemployment benefits due to the circumstances of her departure. She had no choice but to move back in with her parents, leaving behind the independence she had once flaunted. Her group of friends, once so confident in their plans, began to face consequences of their own, each dealing with setbacks they hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life, regaining stability, and finding clarity after the chaos. Work became my anchor, and I allowed myself to slowly recover from the emotional turmoil. Eventually, I met Amy, a financial analyst who was not only intelligent and independent, but shared values of honesty and responsibility. We connected on a level that felt genuine, without manipulation or hidden agendas. Lily tried reaching out multiple times, asking to reconcile, but I knew better than to fall for the same patterns again. I made it clear that our chapter had ended and that there was no going back. Life moved forward, and I embraced a future built on trust, mutual respect, and real partnership, leaving the drama and deceit behind.